I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking about gluten. This is something that I've experienced firsthand. I have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So for me, when I have gluten, it definitely has an impact on my body. So we are going to be talking about the themes we see with the couples that we work with in our couples coaching program with a high sensitivity to gluten, why this is important for you to consider taking this out of your diet, and why it's important to do this with your partner. So excited to break down the myths and the frequently asked questions we see around gluten. Hey there, excited to announce that registration is now open for our free fertility diet challenge. The challenge starts on Monday, April the 19th, 2021. And in this live 5-day challenge, you'll learn which foods are right for your fertility so that you can prepare for pregnancy success, which foods could be harming your fertility so that you don't waste time consuming the wrong diet, and simple steps you can implement right away so that you can optimize preconception health and get pregnant naturally. I have worked with a chef who has a background in nutrition to prepare these new spring recipes that will help prepare your body for your baby. This challenge is for you and your partner. So to join the challenge, you just go to Fertility Diet Freebie, FREEBIE.com. That's Fertility Diet Freebie. Challenge starts April the 19th. It's live. Go to fertilitydietfreebie.com. I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 4 spots available per month to work with us. I would like to invite you and your partner to a Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery Call. And this call is for you if you meet at least one of these criteria. You've been trying to get pregnant for at least 2 years. You've been through at least one failed IUI or IVF. This calls for action takers. If you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. If you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, F-A-B Fertile, and click on Book a Free Call. That's FabFertile, F-A-B Fertile, and click on Book a Free Call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. There's a lot of information about which supplements are right for fertility. And like most couples I speak with, you are probably taking a lot of supplements. But are these supplements optimizing or harming your fertility? That's why we recommend professional grade supplements without harmful dyes, fillers, or top allergens so that you can prepare your body in the best way for pregnancy. And as you may know, we take a functional approach to fertility. And while supplements are included in your customized protocols, which are based on testing, they are only part of the equation because there's no pill you can take that will out-supplement the basics, such as poor diet, dysregulated sleep, either moving too much or not enough, and not dealing with chronic stress. So we do recommend basic supplements for both men and women. And these are essential starters that you need to have right now to optimize your preconception health. And I'm excited to offer you a special discount at our Fab Fertile store. You'll receive 15% discount on our professional grade supplements. So simply go to Fab Fertile Store. That's F-A-B fertilestore.com to access the basic supplements so that you can prepare your body for pregnancy success without wasting time and money on supplements that may not be right for you. Go to Fab Fertile Store, that's fabfertilestore.com, and save 15% on your order. Hey there, thanks so much for listening to the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast. And I've got a favor to ask you. If you are enjoying learning about the functional approach to fertility, consider going to iTunes and rating and reviewing the podcast. This is how it helps the show reach more people that are struggling with infertility, knowing that there's another approach that really can get to the bottom of why it's not working in the first place. So all you need to do is, if you're on the app or the desktop, just go in and consider leaving a 5-star rating and leave a review. And there is step-by-step instructions in the show notes showing you exactly how to do that. So if you can just take a few minutes, just take the few minutes right now. You can pause this recording, come back, leave the review. It would really mean the world to me and help others that are on the fertility journey as well. Take care. I didn't need to go to donor eggs. Obviously, I don't regret it. I have beautiful children. I could have done things differently, restored. I was still cycling back in my 20s. I could have looked at my health, the environmental toxins, the stress I was under.
Many women are being told their eggs are too old. That's often merely an assumption that's not based on actual evidence. The reason being that there is no direct test of egg quality. You can't test egg quality.
It's the man who's got a food sensitivity or he has a zinc deficiency.
Like there can be a root cause to these symptoms that are, quote unquote, period problems, that the doctor will pass you a pill without any question of why.
And some part of you knows that if you can reframe your journey from not want to struggle, or if it is struggle, learn how to embrace the struggle. Learn how to embrace it.
Most conditions in the child occur during the 9 months of development. It's the genetic switches are turned on or turned off, and they're pre-programmed. So you are in such a powerful, amazing position to do amazing things for your kids.
Why is IVF the first step? Because we believe it should be the last step. Welcome to Get Pregnant Naturally, where functional medicine and natural fertility solutions will help you get pregnant and have your baby. Hey there, I'm Sarah Clark, founder of Fab Fertile and your host. I believe the functional approach is the first step for anyone struggling with infertility, and my aim is to help you get pregnant naturally. Today, I'm welcoming Brandy Buskow back to the podcast, and we're digging into why gluten matters if you are trying to conceive. Definitely check out episode number 6 for a Functional Medicine 101 talk, plus a look at some of the tools we use to help couples conceive. And Brandy is part of my team here at Fab Fertile. She's an integral part of our couples coaching program, which uses functional lab testing, diet, and lifestyle changes to dramatically improve conception. So if you're struggling with infertility, your body is desperately trying to tell you something, and focusing on your health will either help you get pregnant naturally, or if you do need to go to the fertility clinic, it will improve your chances of success. Brandy's a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, board-certified functional wellness coach, and master EFT practitioner. And she loves supporting women so they can learn how functional medicine addresses the underlying cause of disease or illness. And thanks so much for listening. I'm so thankful you were here. Make sure you hit subscribe. And if you know someone else who is on the fertility journey, please share this podcast with them. Hey, Brandy, excited to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah. It's always fun to come and chat with you.
Yeah. So today we are talking about a subject near and dear to your heart and really mine as well, gluten. This is something I have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So for me, it's, obviously we're in the middle of this huge gluten-free craze. For me, when I have gluten, there definitely are health issues that I experience. From digestive issues to skin issues to joint issues now. It's interesting. If I am accidentally glutened, like my wrist, I feel like I have carpal tunnel, which happened in the summertime where I went out for the first time after all the restaurants being closed and wasn't, typically I'm bring the chef over, making sure everything's gluten free. And I just was excited I was eating at a restaurant again. And literally there was a sauce on my steak. And I was like, I think that's probably fine. Usually I would ask. And then for weeks after, I swear to God, my joints were just killing me. So now it kind of goes to that. But we are talking today about the impact of gluten on you if you are trying to conceive and really why that matters. Brandy has celiac disease, so knows about this topic, and also is an expert on this topic as well, as had a lot of training with it. I just wanted to talk about, first of all, why is it so important for couples who are trying to conceive to both go gluten-free?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And we do know in studies that every single person, so every human that consumes gluten or wheat, will experience some degree of intestinal permeability or leaky gut from consuming that wheat. So for some people, that might mean that the wheat, when they eat it, causes a leaky gut for a few minutes to half a day to maybe a day, and then things get better and the inflammation goes down. But for others, that leaky gut or intestinal permeability could stay around for weeks or even months. So if we think of it that way, every single time we eat wheat, it's causing a reaction in our body where our immune system is recognizing that protein or that component in the food as a foreign invader, and it's causing leaky gut. That says to us that, I think every person should be aware of that and really think about whether or not they want to include it in their diet, especially if they are struggling to get pregnant and they are trying to optimally prepare their body for pregnancy and conception. So let's talk a little bit about leaky gut, because I think that that's going to help us to kind of have some context on what's going on. Mm-hmm. So if you think about your gut as a cheesecloth, normally a cheesecloth has very, very tiny holes and will let liquid through. So if our gut is like that, the holes are nice and tight and tiny, just big enough to let the essential nutrients through the gut wall that you need for your body, for your cells. But when you have a leaky gut, or when something causes a leaky gut, it's like taking a pen or even a knife and poking a big hole in that cheesecloth. When you do that, let's say you're straining almond milk. Okay. You've taken some almonds and you put them in a blender with some water and you've blended it all up. And now you've got the pulp and you've got the milk and you put it through the cheesecloth so you can strain out the water, and you've got the milk and then the pulp is left in the cheesecloth. Well, if you poke a big hole in that cheesecloth, now you're getting some of that pulp into the milk that you're draining. So you're not really cleaning it all out. And that's essentially what's going to be happening with the gut. If you're having anything that's causing a leaky gut, those little holes, or the tight junctions, we call them, in the gut, get bigger, and larger particles of food pass through the barrier. And because they're big, the immune system tags them and says, this is a foreign invader, and it will start to attack it. And the more that you do that, the more the immune system becomes on high alert, and your body starts to then attack that protein, and you start to become sensitive to it because it's seeing it as a foreign body, a foreign invader. It shouldn't be there. And so now you're upping your immune system, which then in turn is upping inflammation, and that's creating stress on the body. So if every time we eat gluten, that is happening, that's not a good thing. And so we definitely want to really think about whether or not we really need to include gluten or wheat in our diet.
Yeah. And now in the beginning, you talked about the analogy that like in every person, there's, gluten causes some sort of disturbance or potentially intolerance. And sometimes it's for people 5 minutes, other times it's for months. That statement in itself can be potentially controversial. There are many people kind of like, show me the studies. Where is that coming from? What's your take on that? Because I think that comes from Dr. Tom O'Brien.
Yeah, it does come from Dr. Tom O'Brien, and there are some studies that I can share some study links with Sarah so she can put them in the show notes. But there was a study in the American Medical Journal basically showing this, that, and gluten may not necessarily be the only food that we consume that causes this sort of reaction. There are several things that can cause that temporary opening of those tight junctions or that temporary leaky gut situation. Stress does the same thing. So when we're under a tremendous amount of stress, that impacts the tight junctions in the gut and opens them up, which causes the leaky gut situation. Blood sugar issues can do the same thing. Foods that we are sensitive to, maybe let's say you're somebody that's anaphylactic to peanuts, or maybe you have a lactose intolerance and you knew you had a lactose intolerance. When you consume that food, it does the same thing. So it's not just wheat that does this, but I am happy to get links to some of those studies and share them with Sarah so that she can put them in the show notes so you can read through them and see that it is something that does exist and has been studied before.
Awesome. And so many people that have gone gluten-free, and I've noticed for them, like myself, that non-celiac gluten sensitivity, so not celiac disease, but for them, gluten definitely is an issue, whether it's digestive, joint, mood issues, brain fog, anxiety, depression. It also could be if there's an autoimmune disease or skin issues, that they've identified when they have gluten, something happens in their body. And now we get pregnant. So what's your take with consuming gluten during pregnancy if we know we have a sensitivity?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So let's maybe make a distinction between celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and then we can go on to kind of talk about the impacts of consuming it while you're pregnant. So celiac disease is the autoimmune form. So this is where when you consume gluten or wheat, the body starts to attack its own cells. So the body views this protein of gluten as your own tissue, and then it sends out the army, so to speak, and starts to attack the lining of the intestine. So that's what happens when you have celiac disease. It's an autoimmune process that happens. And so people with celiac disease like myself, we cannot have gluten, not only because it doesn't make us feel great, but it starts to actually break the body down and attack the body. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity is where you don't have this autoimmune process happening, but your body is still having some sort of immune reaction to the gluten. And the more that you eat gluten, if you know you're sensitive to it, the more likely it could be that as you continue to consume it in larger and larger amounts over time, you could potentially trigger eventually celiac disease. So just because, you've gone to your doctor and they've done the celiac test and it comes back negative, that doesn't mean that that's a green light for you to have gluten and that it's okay for you. Because for several people, they are quite sensitive and they don't know it. And there really isn't a great test out there to really tell you whether or not you are sensitive to it. The gold standard for sure is eliminating it from your diet for at least 30 days and really track your symptoms and then bring it back in and see how you feel. And almost always we see people have symptoms crop back up when they bring gluten in. Having said that, if you've kind of, maybe you've had some testing done or that gluten causes a problem for you, I would not have it during pregnancy, just because you don't want to be adding something to your body that's creating a stress response or creating an inflammation response. You want to treat your body the best way that you can while you're pregnant so that you are, feeling good and you're providing the nutrients that you need to your baby. So if you're eating gluten because that's the thing you're craving, like I'm craving a piece of white bread with butter because that's what I want while I'm pregnant, and that can happen. What you could also be doing is you could be setting yourself up to causing some inflammation in the gut, and maybe you're not getting the nutrients that you need that you can then pass on to your baby. So I personally don't like the idea of that for that particular reason, the inflammation and potentially causing your body not to be able to absorb nutrients correctly. There are other schools of thought out there that might say, well, you should consume it so that your baby's not sensitive to it. I don't subscribe to that, and I don't think that's a good enough reason for you to be eating it if you know for sure that you're sensitive to it.
And so you talked about the difference between celiac and non-celiac gluten sensitivities. I think any other final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, we could talk a little bit about the different testing and the things to look at. I did mention the celiac test that you would normally get from your doctor. So generally that's a blood test where they're looking for 4 of the different proteins in wheat. Oftentimes you can see a lot of false negatives with that test because it is only looking for 4 of those proteins, and there are over 60. If you're not sensitive or you're not creating antibodies to those proteins when they do that test, and you come back negative, that doesn't mean that maybe you're not reacting or creating antibodies to the other 56 proteins in wheat. That test isn't the greatest test to be able to determine whether or not you are sensitive or even have celiac disease. There is a test out there called the Vibrant Wellness Wheat Zoomer. This is a really great test. It's a newer test out on the market, and it does test for at least 30 of the proteins. So you're getting the ability to look at a lot more of the different proteins to see if you're sensitive to those. You definitely would need to work with a practitioner that's savvy and being able to run that test and look at the results and be able to give you that information. So if you really want to know for sure, definitely work with a practitioner. And that's something that we do with the couples in the couples coaching program. But the other way that I mentioned, the gold standard really is taking it out of your diet. And you really need to do a concerted effort to take it out fully for 30 days. And by doing so, you are going to have to take a little bit of extra work and look at all of your labels and make sure that you're not getting sneaky sources of gluten in there. Really eliminate it from all areas for at least 30 days. See how you feel. Keep track of your symptoms. And these are going to be things like, did you have anxiety and did it get better? Were you having trouble sleeping and did that improve? Were you having skin issues and that seemed to improve? Brain fog, did that improve? Joint pain, you mentioned, Sarah, that's some of the things that you get. Did those things improve? And then after the 30 days, just try a little bit and see what happens. We have almost always, in every person that we've had do the elimination diet and eliminate it from their diet, they've almost always come back and said, I didn't think it did anything when I took it out, but when I brought it back, I got a headache or I got anxiety or I couldn't sleep well. That really is the best way to do it. But if you need to see it in black and white on paper, find a practitioner who can run a good comprehensive test like the Vibrant Wellness Wheat Zoomer.
Yeah, definitely check out episode talking about how and why to do the elimination diet. That will take you through the exact steps for the elimination diet and why it's so important when you're on the fertility journey. So let's go into so we talked about gluten sensitivity and leaky gut. Anything else there you wanted to say about the gliadin? We see that actually, when we do the stool test, if that's elevated, which can then indicate a sensitivity, we use the GI map test. Anything you wanted to say there?
Yeah. So that is another way that when we are working with couples and we're running testing, that we can confirm what the suspicion that perhaps the person that we're working with is having some sort of reaction to gluten. So there is a marker on the stool test that shows us whether or not there's antibodies to wheat or gluten being made in the gut. And we almost always see this with every person that we work with. And again, that's to be expected because, like I said off the top, every single human that consumes wheat is going to have some sort of reaction. And again, it's going to be the degree of that reaction is going to depend on the person. And so we have seen some people where that number's been low and maybe they're not as sensitive, but we've seen others where that number has been really high. We've had to, say to them, this looks to me as if you are very sensitive. And for you, this is something that you really want to look at and make sure that you're not consuming it, and also looking for any potential cross reaction.
Yeah. And then also we see this quite regularly, especially with premature ovarian insufficiency, 1/5 of the cases studies, I've seen some studies pointing to this, and we've also see it anecdotally. So POI or POF, and then an autoimmune disease kind of goes along with it. And we've done a number of podcast episodes talking about the efficacy of the AIP diet, the autoimmune protocol diet. So essentially that's the elimination diet on steroids. So you're taking out the legumes and nuts and seeds and nightshades and more typically for at least 30 days. But there's 2 studies on there, one on the AIP diet and Hashimoto's, and how there's 18 people in the study. One person had to leave the study because she actually got pregnant after 8 weeks. The rest all improved lifestyle factors without medication. The other one was the AIP diet and Crohn's, colitis, irritable bowel disease, and how there was, I think, 11, it was a small study. So 11 people in the study, 75 to 85% of the people went into remission after 6 weeks just by doing the AIP diet. And they had IBD for, I don't know, over 15 years each. So it was people with a lot, suffering for a while. So definitely digging into the AIP diet can be helpful. Anything you want to see there with the connection with autoimmune disease and gluten?
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned a lot of different episodes, which I think have done a really good job to dive into the different ways that autoimmunity can affect fertility. But, essentially, whenever you have an autoimmune condition going on, adding something that creates inflammation and creates your immune system to react is probably something that you don't want to add in. And gluten is one of those things that can do that. And so that's why oftentimes you will hear other experts say, if you have Hashimoto's or you have MS or some of these other autoimmune conditions, it's probably ideal for you to take things out like gluten and dairy, because both of them can be pretty inflammatory and the immune system reacts to those pretty easily. Removing them is a very good strategy, along with all of the lifestyle things you can do to support your body to reduce that inflammation and really allow your body to do its job. You don't want to be adding fuel to the fire.
And we see that a lot of time with the cross reactors where people are like, oh, wait, I'm gluten-free and, I may feel a little bit better, but okay, wait a minute. In this case, obviously you may not be pregnant. That would be the main point. So there's the cross reactors, which a top cross reactor for gluten is dairy. So the body identifies the casein or the casein in dairy. The body identifies it as gluten and then mounts an immune response, and a whole host of other cross reactors. So you can go down a whole rabbit hole of this. At a minimum, we definitely recommend the elimination diet, and then keeping dairy and gluten, you and your partner, out of your body for at least 60 to 90 days, if not pregnant, digging into testing. So, or if you wanted to do testing now and fast track it, that can be an option as well. Anything you wanted to say about the cross reactors there, Brandy?
Yeah, for sure. So if you're somebody that has an autoimmune disease, like I said, whether it's Hashimoto's or PCOS or something like that, it probably is a good idea for you to maybe work with somebody that can do some testing to look at cross reactors, especially if you've removed gluten and you're still not feeling better and it seems as though your antibodies aren't kind of lowering and getting in check. This could be a situation where your body is quite sensitive and it is recognizing some of those proteins as gluten and continuing to mount that immune response. So like you said, Sarah, some of the most common cross reactors are dairy, oats, several non-gluten grains, unfortunately, can cause a problem. Corn, coffee, chocolate. I know people don't like to hear that, but it is a common one. And so again, when we are working with women, if somebody comes to us where we know for sure they have an autoimmune disorder, or we have a suspicion that that could be there, we tend to run some tests along with the wheat zoomer to look for those common cause reactors, because that may be the piece that you're missing. You've gone completely gluten-free, but you're still not feeling great. Maybe you're eating a lot of corn in place of that, and maybe you're really actually reacting to corn and getting that same immune response that you would to gluten.
Been there. Yeah, literally was dairy and gluten-free, and then, packing down the corn chips and all the different corn products, and then realized that corn was an issue. And then now I can have a little bit of corn and not react right away. But before, it would I'd have corn and then immediately my joints would start to flare up. So with that piece, how long does it take for the gut to heal? And what are some strategies we can look at there? Obviously, if we've got gut infections, we're doing the stool test to address those. So typically after we've addressed the infections, and we're going to give you a customized protocol to help. Obviously, the whole idea is to balance your hormones and get you pregnant. But as far as the healing of the gut piece, how long can that take?
So I wish I could come on here and give you a definitive timeline, because that would be amazing. But it really, really does depend on the person. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. How long have you been sensitive to gluten or some of the foods that you're eating? Like you said, do you have any other issues going on in the gut with bacterial infections or parasites? Or maybe you have a history of taking a lot of antibiotics, which can wipe out all of the good gut bacteria. It really does depend personally on your situation. But I would say if you're actively removing the foods that you're sensitive to, you're working on your gut, you're adding in those probiotics, you're making sure that you're, addressing any potential pathogens in the gut. You're working on your stress, because we did talk about this a little bit earlier. Stress, high amounts of stress, can cause a leaky gut situation. So if you are working on that, for some people, it might take a month or two. For other people, it could take 6 months to a year. I wish I could just give you, say, oh, it's done in 90 days if you do everything perfectly. Unfortunately, it really does depend. And if you've been doing really well and then you accidentally get exposed, that can set you back a little bit, but it's not impossible to make improvements. Like you said, Sarah, you used to be able to not have gluten at all, not have corn at all. And now you can. And that, I would say, has contributed to the fact that you've really been working hard on supporting the gut and supporting your hormones and the stress response.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, that predisposed, so I was on birth control, which a lot of times people we work with, we see this. I was on it for, more than 10 years because of the hormone issues. So that predisposes you to gut infections and food sensitivities and nutrient imbalance and that leaky gut. So that piece. And then I had the bladder or the UTI infections, and also chronic sinus infections, yeast infections. So I took antibiotics for the sinus and the bladder infections, like heaps of them, to the point where I became allergic to the antibiotics, and then also the chronic stress. And then it has been a while for me to work on, it's taken a while to heal the gut. We can see some major shifts as we start the whole goal of our thing is to reduce inflammation, reduce the food sensitivities, address the gut infections, work on the environmental stress too, your personal care and all the toxic products that you may be exposed to. So all of that can make it, massive amount of change in a short period of time. It's just, as I say, it's hard to say how long it will take. And people, like to ask that question. Our whole thing is to, fast track your progress. People say, what's the fast track? I really do believe the functional approach is the complete fast track, because going to IVF, that's just, circumventing the whole thing. You'll be one of the lucky ones where you do get pregnant, but then potentially, how is your postpartum health? How's the health of your children? Or like we see where people have tried, IVFs and IUIs for, failed cycles for years, spent tens of thousands of dollars, and it hasn't worked. And if we had have addressed all these things in the beginning, we can set both you and your partner up for, solid success. So just wanted to kind of go into we can talk about some of the places where gluten can hide. Because I think I did in the very beginning, I would have said I was gluten-free. I was not gluten-free. I was that gluten light because I'd go out to a restaurant and have fries because who would think that they would put flour on potatoes? I would have all these different products that if I looked deeper, I didn't know it was actually, maltodextrose or things that names that gluten can hide in. And I made all kinds of screw ups in the beginning. And I'm like, why am I not feeling better? And then as I started to fine tune this piece, so it can hide in like medication, supplements, personal care, packaging. Anything you want to say there, Brandy? That's a big topic.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the most common places that people don't think about when they're going gluten-free. So the number one thing that I will say when we're doing webinars and people are like, I didn't know that it was in there, soy sauce.
Mm-hmm.
So soy sauce has wheat in it. And so if you're using soy sauce, an alternative to soy sauce would be something called coconut aminos. And the nice thing about that is you can get it almost everywhere now. You can even get it at Walmart. So that's a really good alternative. Like you said, sauces. So, if you're going to a restaurant or even bottled sauces, you really do need to look at the labels and look for things like wheat starch, wheat protein, or wheat textured protein. They often will add it to sauces as a thickener. So you want to make sure you're reading your labels. You said the fryers, like depending on how sensitive you are, if they are not using a dedicated fryer for their French fries. So you always want to ask, like, do you dust them in anything? And just a note, I believe in the United States, McDonald's dust their French fries in flour. I don't think they do in Canada. I think when I researched that, but many restaurants do that. So you want to make sure that you ask that question. And then the next question is, okay, are you cooking anything else in that oil? Are they doing like fried chicken or chicken wings or, chicken burgers or things like that? And if they are, and they're not cleaning their oil on a regular basis, there could be remnants left in the oil. And if you're sensitive, you can react to it. The one that we see a lot actually, because a lot of the women that we work with are pretty savvy and they're trying to have the cleanest products possible, is supplements, like you said. And there's a lot of supplements that say are gluten-free, but if you read the back of them, they'll have things like barley grass or wheatgrass. And I have just found, just from my experience being celiac and working with a lot of women, is that even if it says it's gluten-free and there's a small amount of wheatgrass, if you're very sensitive, you are going to react to that. And there are a couple of really high quality prenatal vitamins on the market that have wheatgrass in them. So that's one that I would look at. The other thing is like cough drops and things like that. You want to look on the back and see, does it have malt in it? Malt is also another word for wheat. So malt syrup, malt flavor, that's definitely a place that it can hide. And maybe not necessarily something that you want to go crazy on, but if you know for sure that you're very sensitive to it, you want to look in your personal care products as well, because oftentimes, especially in shampoos and conditioners, they will use wheat protein as a thickener to thicken your hair.
And what about medications? I know some of the thyroid medications.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And so this is where, if you know that you're sensitive, you want to talk to your pharmacist to ask them, do you know if there's any fillers in the medication? Oftentimes you can go online. One of the websites that I really like is drugs.com. You can look up the medication and it will tell you the ingredients. It may not be up to date, especially if you're using maybe not the name brand, you're using a generic brand of that same medication. Just check the inserts that you get from your pharmacist, or even ask your pharmacist to see if there are any fillers, because sometimes they will use wheat as a filler in some of those medications. More commonly, you are going to see things like corn as a filler. So be aware of that as well, especially if you suspect that you're cross-reacting. Corn is a common one in some of the thyroid medications.
And what about in packaging?
That's a good question. So those envelopes, when you're licking envelopes and sending envelopes to somebody, there's wheat in that. So you don't want to be licking envelopes if you know that you're sensitive to it. Even on things like gums, like some of the powders on there, that could be something that you're getting exposed to. So it's really just not trying to fearmonger you and be afraid of every single thing out there, but really just looking for all of the different areas where it could hide. And remember, wheat is like a glue. So when you add water to flour, wheat flour, it's like a glue. Things that you might think of that are like sticky or things like that, just be a little bit wary and maybe just get a paper towel with water and wet it that way instead of licking it with your tongue.
So if you can talk about the thyroid and gluten, what would be your biggest advice there?
I would say if you are having issues with your thyroid or you suspect you have issues with your thyroid, you really, really want to think strongly about being as gluten-free as possible and really looking at the gluten in your environment. And that includes, unfortunately, coming from your partner or your spouse. The reason for that is it's very, very common for people with thyroid issues to be also extremely sensitive to gluten. There is this thing called molecular mimicry that as you go down this path of maybe your thyroid becoming more dysfunctional, and oftentimes a lot of women with hypothyroidism, a high percentage of them have Hashimoto's and just have not been diagnosed. So that's the autoimmune form, where the body can view gluten as the thyroid hormone and can it continue to attack the thyroid. So I would be very wary. I do not recommend gluten or dairy for women who are having thyroid issues because it just creates a cascade of problems and puts the immune system on high alert and causes a lot of inflammation.
Yeah, and the high percentage of people we work with, there's something going on with the thyroid. Either it's hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, or we don't see Graves as much, but the hyperthyroidism as well.
Yeah. And I mean, even the other part of it is that gluten, because it impacts the gut, there's a lot of conversion that can happen of inactive thyroid hormone to active thyroid hormone that happens in the gut. So if you have a leaky gut or there's some inflammation in there, and you're already struggling with your thyroid, you don't want to add more fuel to that fire and make it even harder for your body to convert thyroid hormone. And that can be true even if you're taking thyroid medication. So if you're taking, let's say, your Synthroid and you're still having symptoms and you're doing your labs and it's still looking like, your T3 is really low, maybe there's a conversion issue. And if that's a possibility, maybe gluten's contributing to that.
And so what do we do if we do get exposed? Like typically when I do go out, I start the meal with passing out the digestive enzymes. But what else can we do? If we are out, sometimes we're in them. I haven't gone out in ages, but we do go out to a restaurant. What can we do if we know that we're gluten sensitive and we need to be gluten free? How do we minimize our exposure?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you are asking the right questions. So if you know that you're really sensitive, I recommend, and it's not the funnest thing when you're trying to go out, but do a little bit of research before you leave just to see what's available at that restaurant and see if they do offer gluten-free options, and maybe try to decide before you leave what you're going to have. And then when you're at the restaurant, just let the waiter or waitress know, the server know, I have a really bad sensitivity. I'm allergic to it. Can you please make sure that there's no, flour or wheat in any of these products? They will usually go and check with the chef and make sure. And then you could also ask them to make sure that they're just using a clean surface and clean utensils. That's one thing. And it may feel like you're being annoying, but it's important to you. And, just make sure that if they're doing all of those things and they're really being responsive, like give them a good tip. They're more than happy to do that for you if you're asking them. You can have an enzyme, like you mentioned. And the nice thing is that there's more and more products starting to become available on the market where it's like a gluten enzyme, so that if you potentially get exposed, you can kind of preempt that by taking the enzyme before you eat, and that can minimize the impact if you have been exposed. And we can drop the link maybe in the show notes of 2 products that we really like. One of them is Wheat Rescue from Microbiome Labs, which is a practitioner only, but we can drop a link for that. And the other one is Allergenza, and that one I think you can get on FullScript and some other places, so we can share that information with folks.
Great. And you can go to the Fab Fertile store, and then they can find the Allergenza, and then we'll do the link for the Wheat Rescue. And then, just one more thing on the restaurant piece. To me, if someone's like, ooh, ooh, they start asking you what's gluten-free, like run out of that restaurant. That's not the restaurant for you. If you need to explain what it is, don't eat there. And I actually now will say I'm allergic. In the beginning, I'm like, oh, I'm sensitive. Now I just say, because they'll say, is that an allergy or a sensitivity? Allergy, because it's like, why would you want to pay good money to then feel like garbage afterwards and suffer for, weeks or months because you've been exposed. So you end up being kind of high maintenance. But it's like asking for what you want. And as you say, as Brandy's saying, if they're helpful, then give them a great tip. Cause I find that, many of the restaurants, when you say this, they've got the chef coming over, the manager coming over, you do feel high maintenance, but you're paying to eat something and you want to feel good afterwards. I've been eating this way for 10 years. In the beginning, I certainly was not that demanding. I was like, oh, okay, fine, whatever you have. Now I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah. And there's more places that are doing this, like even something simple as like Five Guys burgers. I mean, I can go in there now and I'll order for our family. We don't do it often, but I'll order and I'll say, okay, I want, bunless burger. And then they'll ask me, I don't even have to say it. They'll ask me, is it an allergy? And I say, yes. And so they mark it down and they change their gloves and they clean the surface and they make sure that they're not cross contamination. So just ask them and tell them and give them a tip and thank them for doing a great job. And I mean, it's worth feeling a little high maintenance at first, and eventually you'll just get used to it.
Yeah. Typically when I travel, I'll search out all the different, gluten-free, dairy-free options and make it a game that way. It's not like, oh, the ones I can't go to. It's all the ones I can go to because this, we are in the middle of a gluten-free craze and a lot of people are eating this way because they feel a lot better by doing so. There's a lot of like really cool restaurants. I know in Vancouver, I found this awesome gluten-free vegan donut shop. And I literally, when I fly in, I grab like 6 donuts. And then when I fly out, I have 6. Now I'm sharing those with my daughter. So not all for me. But they're so freaking good. It can be fun. It's not about deprivation and you starving away here. As you start to see how food impacts your body, it's to me, it's like, wow, why didn't someone tell me this? And there's things I can do. I don't need to take medication and pills for the rest of my life, antibiotics, all these other things I was doing. There's things we can do to, improve our health. And then also, so as far as some themes that we see, so we're working with complex cases such as low AMH and high FSH, premature ovarian insufficiency or failure, diminished ovarian reserve. And we see like over and over again, right, Brandy, that non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Anything you wanted to see there with that theme?
Yeah. And it's not just with the women. I mean, we've had instances where some of the men, we've done some testing or they've done the elimination diet and, they didn't realize that they were sensitive to it. They come back, oh, my gas and bloating is better and my acid reflux improved and I lost a few pounds. And, so when we're talking with our couples, is it worth it to you to take it out for 6 months so that you can get pregnant and your body is healthy? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, yeah, absolutely. It's not that hard. It's getting easier and easier nowadays to do it. You can go to Walmart now and find some pretty good, affordable gluten-free things that are pretty healthy. And I mean, and I live in not the most popular area in Canada, and we even have it at our Walmart. So it's not hard to do. And especially if you are having some of these issues and you're struggling with your fertility, this is just one step that can really have a big impact and make a difference. And, we've had a couple of women that I can think of who just that alone was like the big shift for them to get pregnant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just kind of we're just going to reiterate here. So this is for you to consider so a lot of people just think it's just digestive issues. So if you have digestive issues, for sure, looking at this. So if you've got constipation, bloating, gas, burping, diarrhea, digestive issues, consider going gluten-free. Anything you want to add there on the digestive piece?
Yeah, it's very common that people think, well, my stomach is fine and I have bloating, so it's not a problem. That is definitely not the case. Gluten can impact you in so many different ways, and it can actually change. So before I was diagnosed with celiac disease, I had IBS, like digestive issues. Now, when I get exposed, it's neurological. It's no longer a digestive issue. It's neurological. So it can have a very big impact on so many different areas of the body: anxiety, mood, sleep, brain fog. Sometimes you might feel like you have ADD, skin, joints, digestion. There's so many different things that can be impacted by gluten, and not only gluten, like other foods that you may be sensitive to. You could say the same thing for all of those symptoms. So just because you're not having gas and bloating or constipation or IBS doesn't mean that potentially you might not have an issue with gluten. It's definitely worth looking into, especially if you are struggling to conceive. It's worth giving that a try to see how it can impact you and impact your partner.
Absolutely. The skin piece, so if you have acne or dermatitis or psoriasis or skin rashes, hives, like dig into that. The mood piece with anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, brain fog, even bipolar, schizophrenia, those sort of ones too. Looking at gluten can be a, not in all cases, but definitely if you haven't removed it, for sure, looking to remove it. And then the joint piece with the aching joints, people with sore backs and just aching bodies, taking out gluten can, not having to deal with those. And then also, like we talked about, if there's an autoimmune disease. So if you're listening to this podcast right now and you have an autoimmune disease, really looking at diet is key. Any final thoughts on gluten for us, Brandy?
Yeah, I think, we went over a lot of things, and it can feel overwhelming for some people to go gluten-free. Mm-hmm. But again, there are so many great alternatives out there. And once you get into making it a lifestyle, it might feel like a little bit of a struggle at first. But eventually it's just going to be a really easy transition. I mean, at this point, my family doesn't even really miss it anymore. There's so many good alternatives out there. You get used to, having bunless burgers. It's like, oh, what can we pile on now that we don't have to fit between two buns? I mean, there's so many great alternatives. There's really good pastas out there. If that's your thing, you could also do veggie noodles. It's a lot more accessible nowadays than it used to be. And know that it may be a struggle at first, and that's okay. And it's totally normal, and everybody goes through it, but eventually it will just become second nature for you and you won't even miss it.
Absolutely. And we recommend both you and your partner doing this change. It's not just about you making the changes, your partner as well, doing the elimination diet together, seeing how food impacts both of you. And then as you reintroduce the foods, seeing exactly, it could be different symptoms for you and for your partner. So thanks a lot, Brandy, for coming on and sharing the words of wisdom on gluten.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 4 spots available per month to work with us. I would like to invite you and your partner to a Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery Call. And this call is for you if you meet at least one of these criteria. You've been trying to get pregnant for at least 2 years. You've been through at least one failed IUI or IVF. This calls for action takers. If you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. If you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, F-A-B Fertile, and click on Book a Free Call. That's FabFertile, F-A-B Fertile, and click on Book a Free Call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. Hey there, excited to announce that registration is now open for our free Fertility Diet Challenge. The challenge starts on Monday, April the 19th, 2021. And in this live 5-day challenge, you'll learn which foods are right for your fertility so that you can prepare for pregnancy success, which foods could be harming your fertility so that you don't waste time consuming the wrong diet, and simple steps you can implement right away so that you can optimize preconception health and get pregnant naturally. I have worked with a chef who has a background in nutrition to prepare these new spring recipes that will help prepare your body for your baby. This challenge is for you and your partner. So to join the challenge, you just go to Fertility Diet Freebie, FREEBIE.com. That's Fertility Diet Freebie. Challenge starts April the 19th. It's live. Go to fertilitydietfreebie.com. You may be taking supplements that instead of optimizing your fertility, may be harming it. That's why we recommend professional grade supplements without harmful dyes, fillers, or top allergens. Simply go to FabFertile Store, that's FABFertileStore.com to receive a 15% discount on our basic supplement recommendations for preconception health. That's FabFertileStore.com. The Get Pregnant Naturally podcast, including show notes and links, provides information with respect to healthy living, nutrition, lab testing, and is intended for informational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it to be construed as such. We cannot guarantee that the information provided on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast reflects the most up-to-date medical research. Information is provided without representation or warranties of any kind. Please consult a qualified physician for medical advice and always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health and nutrition program.